They can barely be seen by the naked eye, but they're the most vital microorganisms on the planet. On the south coast of England is a world-renowned hub for marine research, where scientists are monitoring a fundamental part of the ocean's microscopic ecosystem.
Did you know that just a teaspoon of seawater can contain more than 1 million living organisms? They're called plankton, and they're vital for the health of our ocean. But they're also facing enormous threats.
This is the buoy that marks the spot of our Western Channel Observatory long-term monitoring station L4. We're one of the best, longest plankton time series in the world. We have been monitoring here now for over 30 years. The boat comes out weekly, so we have a fantastic time series. Initially started with the zooplankton, and that was back in 1988, and then a couple of years later we started the phytoplankton.
Plymouth's Marine Laboratory is dedicated to pioneering scientific research and marine ecology. And for over 30 years, they've been monitoring changes in plankton around Plymouth.
What are plankton? Explain to me, what are these amazing little creatures?
Well, they are the workhorses of the oceans, and not just oceans, but rivers, streams. Any water contains thousands and thousands of different plankton species. They produce oxygen, dissolves carbon dioxide in the water. They produce oxygen for all marine ecosystems, marine organisms. They fix that carbon dioxide as carbon, and then that becomes the biomass. That's the food source for further up the food chain. And that's really fundamental for human food security. You know, we rely on so much on fish, aquaculture, and they're all feeding on the plankton, so they have a very important role.
The team collect their weekly samples vertically from the seabed, before being split, counted and classified into their different groups. At the buoy, other measurements are also taken, including water salinity and temperature. This data has confirmed that water temperatures have been rising steadily over the last 100 years.
Why is it so important you monitor over a long period of time?
We need that baseline in plankton. They are fundamental to all marine ecosystems. And we know that the climate is changing. We have man-made issues like pollution, nutrients. So it's important that we actually have that baseline. The plankton do change very rapidly and over different timescales. So it's really important to have that long-term data set so we can understand what's there, when, and how we can interpret what's happening in the future. We get very strong seasonal patterns in the plankton, and what can concern us slightly is that the relationship of the different plankton will change, and because plankton form the base of marine food webs, that will have implications further up the food chain, including implications for food security for the human population. So we believe that some plankton, there is a change in the relationship. Some are getting smaller. That could have impacts for the food chain. But what we're finding here isn't necessarily what's happening elsewhere. So it's really important that we monitor, understand the change that we're seeing and how that fits into the global picture. Here I've got one of my little plankton nets. This is a very small net, and it's got a very small mesh size on so that we can capture the very smallest plankton, the phytoplankton.
Phytoplankton are microscopic plants that, like plants on land, feed themselves using photosynthesis. They convert light from the sun into energy, capturing CO2 and so lowering its concentration in the ocean. But they also release oxygen. In fact, half of the oxygen available to us is produced by phytoplankton. But their second major role is as the primary food source for zooplankton, or animal plankton, Together, these form the base of the oceanic food web. As larger zooplankton, fish and then marine mammals all depend on them for their survival.
So this is being used as a traditional method for many, many years. This is something I do every week, and it gives me a really good idea of...
It's going down quite far.
It is going down quite far, so we're here about 50 metres. It's just a question of very gently bringing it back up, and obviously it just sifts through the water and concentrates the plankton, which we can then pop in a bottle and take back to the laboratory to have a look in the microscope. So here we go, and then the sample is just concentrated in here, and then we just pop it in there.
It's hard to imagine, just looking at it, that there is that much life.
It is, yes. In a single drop of water there are thousands of individual plankton. There's lots of lovely phytoplankton. Oh, wow. So these are diatoms, which tend to use just the photosynthesis to acquire their nutrition.
Oh gosh, look at that one.
And then we have these again that traditionally classed as phytoplankton, but now they're regarded as a mixed plankton because obviously they use chloroplasts to harvest the sunlight.
Mm-hmm. So Claire, I can see on the screen this one that almost looks like a starfish. It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, isn't it? This is a diatom. It's part of the phytoplankton, harvesting sunlight for its energy. It's a really important role. And what's amazing about these is they're actually individual little cells. They're individuals, but they join together to make these beautiful chains, which gives them the advantage potentially of staying buoyant in the surface of the water, so they can get the sunlight. And in some cases, they have ways of avoiding predation by the zooplankton, which obviously want to eat them.
But like many other marine species, plankton face enormous threats. The Plymouth Marine Laboratory discovered that zooplankton are ingesting microplastics.
So the pollutant that I tend to focus on is that of microplastics, very small particles of plastic. They can be fibres that come from textiles such as clothing, or they could release from larger bits of plastic that break down over time. These little bits of plastic are entering our oceans, and because of their very small size and because of how abundant they can be eaten by a wide range of animals. And these can have direct toxicity to lots of different types of marine organisms, including zooplankton.
And what happens when those animals ingest microplastics?
So when a copepod, for example, eats microplastic, it can cause gut blockages, it can interfere with their ability to feed normally, and those two things combined can cause toxicological effects on the animals. And those toxicological effects can include changes to their feeding ability, to their ability to reproduce and have healthy eggs and healthy offspring, and also the growth and development of those animals over time.
It sounds quite dramatic, impacting their ability to reproduce. What could happen?
If there's enough of that microplastic pollution, as well as lots of other stresses like the changing climate and other types of pollutants, will it have an effect on the population as a whole? Because if we're seeing a declining population of our zooplankton, that could have a cascading effect for all of the marine ecosystem, because these animals are so vital as a food source to lots of different types of animals, but they also have really fundamental roles in the biogeological chemical pump.
Because the plankton absorb pollution, they can act as an early warning system, showing us which pollutants are damaging the oceanic ecosystem.
This is a picture of the northern krill species, which are small shrimp-like crustaceans. This is a heat map of their abundance in the 50s and 60s, and you see, compared to the later years, the last couple of decades, there's been an enormous decline, and that is only due to climate warming.
Professor Angus Atkinson has been a marine ecologist for 40 years. Recently, he received an award from the British government for his services to conservation and research in Antarctica. He's currently researching how plankton are responding to climate change.
As the North Atlantic has warmed, the isotherms, the bands of equal temperature, have tended to shift north, and that has squeezed the distribution of krill up into the northern regions, and that has led partially to the decline.
It's quite a troubling image in terms of how dramatic the change is.
It is, and it's not just these krill species, but a whole suite of the zooplankton and phytoplankton are also declining due to the warming. The thing that we're trying to understand at the moment is the exact mechanism, because it could be directly affecting the physiology of these zooplankton species, but on the other hand, it could be warming affecting the base of the food web through increased stratification of the surface waters. So that's basically cutting off the nutrient supply from below, which basically starves the food chain. So that would affect the phytoplankton on which these zooplankton feed, and in turn lead to food shortages for the zooplankton, which are causing them to decline. The really good thing about zooplankton is that they're very sensitive indicators of climate warming, because they're not exploited commercially generally, and also they've got short life cycles, so they're very responsive to the warming.
So these zooplankton are one of the best indicators we've got of what's happening in the ocean?
Yes, I would say they're the best indicator we've got, because they're very sensitive to the warming, but also we've got this lovely time series which we haven't got for some of the other species.
Are you concerned that these changes may get worse?
Well, what I'm really concerned with is that there's going to be some sort of step change. You know, people often think climate change is a sort of gradual warming, and the temperatures might warm gradually, but sometimes you get really serious surprises in the plankton, and there's a big step change downwards. That happened in the late 80s. There was it's called a regime shift, and that was a really fundamental changes which catches everything off balance and sort of desynchronizes the food web.
It's now known in the 1980s there was actually a major change in the Earth's biophysical systems, from the upper atmosphere to the depths of the ocean. The event was triggered by rapid global warming, causing a shift in temperatures. And it's believed it caused a number of global environmental changes, including an increase in wildfires in the United States, an increased flow of snow-fed rivers in northern Europe. But since then, Professor Atkinson and his team have been tracking changes in plankton, essential for ocean and climate research. By monitoring zooplankton, Angus and his team believe climate change may be indirectly impacting fish by reducing their nutrient supply through small declines in plankton populations.
Should we be worried about what's happening to them?
Well, there's two sort of things that zooplankton supply to humans, which we call sort of ecosystem services. One of them is supporting these commercially exploited food chains, for example, fisheries or aquaculture feed. The other one is the role that phytoplankton and zooplankton do in exporting carbon. So the phytoplankton are fed upon by the zooplankton, and the waste products of the zooplankton export that carbon very effectively to ocean depths, where the carbon is stored for maybe hundreds of years and out of reach of humans.
So they've been performing a really important decarbonising role.
We're just trying to quantify some of the carbon exported, and for example in the Southern Ocean we're estimating that each year the zooplankton are exporting maybe over 100 million tonnes of carbon each year.
The process in which phytoplankton transfer organic carbon from the surface waters to the deep ocean in vast quantities is called the biological carbon pump. Carbon reaches the deep sea as marine snow, tiny pieces of carbon-rich material made up of a mixture of dead plankton, the shedding of scales or tissue from larger fish or marine mammals, and even faecal pellets. Without plankton playing this crucial role in the carbon cycle, Earth couldn't regulate its climate. In fact, without the biological carbon pump, the amount of carbon dioxide added to the atmosphere would be twice as large as that which humans have already added. But man-made climate change is warming our oceans at a rate that may shift plankton's seasonal cycles, disturbing the relationship between predator, the zooplankton, and prey, the phytoplankton, something called trophic mismatch. An outcome like this would be felt across the oceanic and global food web. That's why more research into plankton is crucial. Manual plankton sampling using a boat and a net is time-consuming. So the team at Plymouth Marine Laboratory have just begun testing state-of-the-art technology. They'll deploy 2 submersible instruments to automatically take images of plankton as well as take samples. By increasing their sampling and imaging to round-the-clock monitoring, the team will have a huge wealth of data to analyse.
This plankton camera is called the Plankton Imager. We've suspended it 1 metre under the water. It's imaging all of the objects that it sees in the water, segmenting those images, saving them, and then we're beaming those back to the lab so we can study what the instrument sees.
This ultra-advanced piece of equipment will be deployed off the south coast of the United Kingdom to image the microscopic plankton completely autonomously. The information will be sent back to their labs to assist them with tracking changes in plankton.
Plankton are tiny organisms. Is it difficult to take images of them?
It's very difficult, and the technology to do it has only really emerged in the last, say, 2 decades or so. And commercial products have only been around very recently. So plankton vary in size from submicron scales. So a micron is a millionth of a metre, and roughly the width of a human hair is, say, 100 microns. So if you took a micron-sized organism, you could line up 100 of them along the width of a human hair. So they're really, really tiny. They're not all tiny, however, because plankton are classed as anything that drifts freely with ocean currents. So some are submicron scale, others are metre-sized jellyfish. It's very challenging to be able to image not only the small organisms, but also across such a broad size range.
So how are you meeting that challenge then with the imaging devices?
So one of the special things about our cameras is we don't have just one camera, we have 2. So it tends to be this technology is tailored to image different parts of a plankton size spectrum. And there's sort of fundamental trade-offs with these cameras, which means one camera can't do everything. So one of our cameras is an imaging flow cytobot. It tends to image smaller organisms from around 10 microns in size up to 100. It takes in a very small amount of water because these smaller organisms are much more abundant and you don't need to sample as much. This instrument, the Plankton Imager, pumps 34 litres per minute, so it's sampling a much larger volume, but it has to do that because the organisms it is imaging are much bigger and they're also around in lower concentrations.
With a high-power turbine on the buoy out at sea, as well as solar panels, the submersibles will be powered using renewable energy. And along with reducing the need for research vessels, this new technology goes a long way to net zero research, as well as increasing their knowledge of Plymouth's plankton communities.
What is it we're seeing here?
So this laptop is getting a live stream of the data which is coming from the Plankton Imager under the water there. So this is allowing us to see the objects that it's seeing as it sucks in water and then images everything that crosses the camera. So even though the majority of this is detritus, some of this also we have images of living cells, and it's a very hard job to pick these out by eye. It requires the expertise of a trained taxonomist to be able to do that, to distinguish all of these different objects and what they are, whether they're detritus, whether they're living, and if they're living, what type of taxa it actually is. The aim of this eventually, and this is work we're doing at the moment, is to automate this process by creating machine learning models which learn from expert human taxonomists, so in a process that's called supervised learning.
And what does this data tell us about the health of the ocean?
So within these images, so there's lots of detritus, but also mixed in within those images are plankton. And we can identify within those images the type of plankton, how diverse that population of plankton is, how abundant different types of plankton are. And using that, we can then form a sort of assessment of how healthy the ecosystem is, how different it is to how it's been in the past, and thus whether it's changing. And if it is changing, what implications that has for example, ecosystem services such as food production, given that these organisms form the base of the marine food web and support all other species that live at higher trophic levels.
As well as increasing their data, the time series is open access, meaning other research scientists across the world can utilise it. Back in the lab, Claire Widdicombe uses their other imager to demonstrate the technology.
This is the imaging flow cytobot. So this is our new generation technology where we will be able to quantify the phytoplankton, but excitingly in situ underneath the mooring buoy that we saw at station L4. And it will sit in this waterproof housing. And the beauty of this instrument is it can run a sample every 20 minutes. So we will get, and it's 24/7 up to a period of 3 to 6 months at sea. We get these lovely images here of those plankton.
So you can just see them all coming through, different shapes and sizes.
So it's just great for capturing in really high resolution the smaller plankton.
Wow, this is an amazing variety.
This is a composite image of some of the many images that we collected from the sample run, and this will be available real time.
What do you hope you'll get from getting this sort of information?
Oh, well, it's just going to increase the volume of data we have, and the fact that we can be getting data 24/7 over a period of time without the boat going out is just phenomenal.
As well as submersibles imaging the plankton, the team here also use cutting-edge satellite observations to predict changes in plankton that could threaten both marine and human health.
This is a very nice satellite image of the North Sea. This one was last year when we had that very warm weather in 2023. This is enhanced, but you can see these stripes of redder water, brown and red, and that was associated with a particular harmful species of algae called Noctiluca. And it's a bioluminescent species, but it can be a nuisance, and it can take the oxygen too low in the water for marine life to survive. Most algae is natural and harmless, and also the base of the food chain. So there's all kinds of plankton existing in the water, but then they grow when they have the right conditions, and that would be in the spring when the water stops mixing too much, and when there's enough heat and light for the particular algae to flourish.
When phytoplankton development accelerates, it can cause a bloom, seen here in the extreme green colour of the water. It's an accumulation of microscopic algae, a type of phytoplankton, in the surface layer of fresh and marine water bodies. They can be beneficial, feeding fisheries and ecosystems. However, some species produce toxins, which, when a bloom occurs, can accumulate in the food web, becoming a major environmental problem.
Are we seeing these harmful algal blooms more?
There's quite a lot of research now that these types of harmful bloom events are becoming more frequent, and the temperature of the water might be one factor, but also fertilisers coming off the lands, getting into the rivers, are producing unnatural balance of phosphates and nitrates, and that's leading to overly increased algal blooms, and some of those might be harmful. So we're looking to use satellite images to provide this early warning so that, for instance, aquaculture farmers can take actions to protect their finfish or their shellfish from risks from this type of algae.
And so are you able to forecast how that will change, how that will move?
The satellite images can just give us an early warning of a bloom, but it can't tell us where it's going to go. But if we feed the satellite image in to inform the model, then together that can give us a few days' prediction of where that bloom might go. When we notice that there's a bloom happening, then we can reach out to people that have sampling routinely. So, for instance, that might be the Environment Agency around the UK, or the Food Standards Agency do regular sampling to protect the consumers of fish and shellfish. So that can tell us what species is actually in the water, and then that helps us to train the machine learning algorithms to recognise the colour that that particular bloom is making in the water.
Plankton are everywhere. The unmistakable smell of the seaside, that's decaying plankton. The varying shades of blue and green of the ocean, that's plankton. They have been around for millions of years and endured many planetary changes. But if our environment changes, so too will plankton. Most people, when they think about marine conservation, will think of saving whales or sharks. But plankton fuels the largest ecosystem on the planet. They are our planet's unsung heroes. The loss of plankton would be a global catastrophe, and we must listen to what they're telling us as we face up to the big environmental challenges that threaten our survival.